here is to explain to you what I mean by leading the examined life of the law. I draw the phrase from the figure of Socrates as presented in the dialogues of Plato. I've been deeply absorbed by the task of understanding the figure of Socrates and his relevance to leading a fulfilled life both in and beyond the law. Socrates is made to say, in a well-known dialogue of Plato, the unexamined life is not worth living, and so, we may infer, Socrates calls on us to lead an examined life. Central to my explanation of my idea about the examined life of the law is another explanation, namely an explanation of a method of analysis I have developed in writing and in teaching around Europe and in several classes of Harvard Law School. My term for this method is the Logocratic method. I will try very briefly to introduce some definitions to help explain how the Logocratic method works and how it can help to foster what I will call Socratic virtue. Socratic virtue makes a demand on two kinds of legal analysts. First, Socratic virtue for a lawmaker or law applier. This Socratic virtue calls upon anyone who fashions or applies legal rules to patterns of facts by means of legal arguments, including especially in the American system of law, judges and legislators, to do so by means of legal arguments that are strong in a particular sense, and by means of making legal rules that lend themselves to the making of strong legal arguments. Second, Socratic virtue for the analyst of lawmaking and law applying. This Socratic virtue calls upon anyone who analyzes patterns of facts into potentially applicable legal rules, whether of actual events or hypothetical events, cogently and accurately to discern the logical structure of legal rules and legal arguments, and to assess the degree of strength of legal arguments in each of the following three measures of strength: epistemic, dialectical, and rhetorical. The term Logocratic method. The Logocratic method is a method of systematic analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of arguments, including but not limited to legal arguments. I fashioned the term from the ancient Greek terms logos, word or argument, and kratos, strength, as the kratos of the demos is demos kratia, hence the word democracy, so the kratos of logos is logocracy, the state promoted by the Logocratic method. Epistemic strength. The discipline of logic is the study of the epistemic warrant that the premises of an argument provide for its conclusion. The epistemic strength of an argument is the degree of support that the premises of the argument provide for its conclusion. That is, if one believes the premises, to what extent should one believe the conclusion of the argument? The term dialectical strength. A dialectic is a competition among arguers. The dialectic of an argument is the strength or weakness when that argument is in competition with another argument. There are both formal and informal rules that govern and guide competition among arguments. Leading examples of dialectical competition, on the formal sort, litigation, plaintiff versus defendant, prosecutor versus defendant, or in a judicial decision, majority versus dissent, as in the Monge opinion, which I'll talk about in a moment. Informal dialectical competition, an example is the Socratic elenchus. The term elenchus is the term used for Socrates' discussions with his interlocutors. It means cross-examination. The term rhetorical strength of an argument. Rhetoric is a specific attempt by a rhetor to persuade a target audience to accept a proposition or set of propositions, and so the rhetorical strength of an argument is the degree to which it persuades a targeted audience to believe either the conclusion of the argument or the inference from the premises of the argument to its conclusion. Olga Monge and her lawsuit for breach of contract. Olga Monge was an employee at a factory in New Hampshire in the early 1970s. After working there for a while, she was approached by the foreman of the factory and asked for a date. When she refused, she found herself moved from one job to another and then eventually fired. Her case went all the way from a jury trial to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. Monge's case illustrates the three measures of strength or weakness of an argument. Epistemic strength. There are many arguments in the Monge opinion, but given my limited time, to illustrate the logocratic method, I'll focus on the two most important arguments. First, deductive argument in the Monge majority opinion. Deductive arguments have the greatest possible epistemic strength an argument can have. This is because in a valid deductive argument, by definition, whenever all the premises of the argument are true, it is not conceivable or possible that the conclusion is false. There's a very clear, valid deductive argument in Monge when the court applied the new rule it fashioned to the facts of Olga Monge's case, allowing the court to decide the case in her favor. Fairly represented, the argument would look like this. That's the deductive argument. Analogical argument. Here's an important question for our understanding of whether the Monge majority opinion and the Socratic virtue of leading the examined life of the law did the argument by analogy that the court offered have the characteristic virtues of argument by analogy. I believe it did not. Here's the analogical argument as it appears in the opinion. My assessment of the central failure of epistemic virtue in Monge is this. All analogical arguments require work by identifying patterns of similarity and difference between the sources of the analogy and the targets of the analogy. A rule is always required to be a part of an argument by analogy, and that rule explains the patterns of similarity and difference that the argument by analogy identifies and endorses. The Monge majority was very unclear about the rule for changing precedents that they were articulating and applying. The rule they seem to have endorsed would be enormously destabilizing for the large and important domain of employment law in New Hampshire. The analysis I've just given is about epistemic strength, but very quickly let me say the other two types of strength. Dialectical strength is also observable in the Monge opinion. The dialectical competition of the plaintiff, Olga Monge, versus the B.B. Rubber Company. Her argument was that all of the facts that transpired between her and the company amounted to breach of contract. Their competing argument was that it did not. Similarly, there's a competition between the majority opinion in the Monge case and the dissent, the majority siding with her, the dissent siding with the company. The rhetorical strength is the final of the three types of strength, and it is very clearly on display in the Monge opinion, in the majority opinion. We're told all of these facts about Olga Monge, that before coming to the United States in 1964, she was a school teacher in Costa Rica, that she came to New Hampshire in 1965, that she attended college from 7 to 10 o'clock 5 nights a week to qualify to teach here, that she used money she earned from her employment with the defendant on the night shift beginning at 11 o'clock for her college expenses. Was the judge making a special law for immigrant mothers from Costa Rica who go to college and work in factories? Obviously not. The Monge majority offers these details to advance the rhetorical goal of showing that Olga Monge is a person of virtue whose treatment by the iron hand of employment at will, the previous rule before this court changed it, is inconsistent with desirable public policy. In this way, the court seeks to justify to its target audiences what the court knew was a substantial change of the law of employment at will. Likely, its target audiences included the New Hampshire legislature, a later panel of the Supreme Court itself, and more generally, the polity of New Hampshire, and perhaps even the polities of other jurisdictions. There are other aspects of the rhetorical appeal of this argument, but in conclusion, in offering these quick analyses, I myself attempt to live up to the Socratic virtue of the analyst of lawmaking and law applying, while at the same time trying to offer you a cogent and accurate assessment of how well the justices in the case lived up to the Socratic virtue of the legal rule maker and legal rule applier.